That Time I Got Reincarnated as a slime is filled with many interesting races that live among one another, and the dynamic of those various races is really what makes the series so entertaining. That's why I wanted to cover the individual races found in the Tensura series, and what better way to start by first going over the Ogres or Kijins, one of the major races in the series. So in today's video, I'll be covering everything you need to know about them, and it goes without saying there will be spoilers for the Tensura series, so here's a spoiler warning just in case. Also, if you enjoyed the video and want more anime content, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel as well, it really helps.
ゲームや映画だとこんなイメージだったけど随分違うんだな。
So what exactly are Ogres and Kijins, and how did they first spawn in the Tensura world? To answer this question, we have to first go back to the time when the Star King Dragon Valdenava had just created the main Tensura world. After creating the world, he realized that it was devoid of life, so he created a singular being known as Twilight Valentine, or also called the Ancestor, and gave him the task of bringing life into this world. Thus, Twilight would perform countless experiments on spiritual life forms like elementals, and he was able to eventually create 4 new races that serve as the progenitors from which all subsequent races found in the Tensura world, including the Ogres and Kijins, could trace their origins back to. For the Ogres and Kijins, they were derived from the Ankis, or better known as Onis, that Twilight had created by taking fire elementals and then incarnating them into humanoid vessels. Kijins were basically the degenerated descendants of an Oni, while the Ogres were the degenerated descendants of the Kijins. However, despite their degeneration, both races still retain the ability to evolve and achieve the level of an Oni, but I'll go into more detail about it later in the video. But yeah, that is basically how the Ogres and Kijins first came into existence. Now moving on, I want to first go over the history regarding the Ogres, and like I said, they were the degenerated form of the Kijins. They seem to only live within the confines of the Great Jura Forest, as there were never any mentions of Ogres residing in other parts of the world, and there used to be multiple Ogre clans that live within the forest, constantly clashing with one another. Also, at some point in time, they stopped fighting and had informally joined forces to establish an Ogre settlement. Now, Ogres were widely known as a race of militaristic demi-humans that enjoyed fighting, but because they have shown hostilities towards humans, they were classified and treated as monsters instead. The Ogre race was quickly recognized as a powerful presence inside the Jura Forest, and even outsiders knew of the dangers they posed, because with a single Ogre normally having a threat level that averaged from B to A-, a group of Ogres can easily have a threat level of around rank A. That's why some of the inhabitants within the Jura Forest, even Demon Lords, would hire warriors from the Ogre race as mercenaries because of their usefulness and strength. But despite their prominence and strength, the Ogres mostly kept to themselves unless they were provoked, so they lived a relatively peaceful life within the Jura Forest undisturbed by major conflicts for generations. However, this reclusive way of life did cause the population of the Ogre village to somewhat stagnate, consistently numbering around 300 individuals. Although it's worth noting their lack of population growth can also be attributed to the fact that they are magic-born creatures, meaning they have a longer lifespan, often exceeding a few hundred years, so they rarely have to worry about procreation. Additionally, having children as a magic-born creature carry risks as well, like losing a majority of their powers and a significant reduction in lifespan, leading to their hesitation to having children. That said, the Ogre village would remain undisturbed for years, but around 400 years before the arrival of Rimuru, a group of heavily injured armored warriors who were actually human otherworlders had arrived at the village. But because Ogres in the Tensura series were more honorable and civilized compared to the usual Ogres that have been depicted in other fantasy media, they spared the injured warriors and decided to help them recover. So to express their gratitude, the warriors instructed the Ogres the fighting techniques of their homeland called the Oboro-ryu style, or also known as the Hazy style, which was founded by Byakuya Araki, one of the otherworlders. Now going on a tangent, what was the Oboro-ryu style? Well, it was a swordsmanship technique created for the sole purpose of defeating monsters, but to be more precise, it was a technique that was highly effective against Magical-based life forms. That's because Magicals were essentially the life force of Magical-based life forms, and what this technique does is allow users to infuse their attacks with fighting spirit to simulate the effects of magic, causing their attacks to disrupt or nullify the target's Magicals. That's why it was dangerous, but eventually it would be adopted by the Ogres and became the main fighting technique used by their people. Later, the Oboro-ryu style even became the official style used by the Tempest Federation military. Continuing on, the Otherworlders also shared much of their culture, stories, weapons and armors with the Ogres as well. Some even intermingled with them, going on to produce Ogre-human hybrid descendants like Hakuro and his father. This was basically the reason behind how the Ogres could have a culture that was inspired by Eastern culture, despite being in a world that has a predominantly Western-inspired setting. In any case, the Ogre village was able to prosper thanks to the other worlders, but sadly, the village will eventually be destroyed by the Orcs a few hundred years later. The Ogres of the Jura Forest were almost drove to the brink of extinction because of the massacre with only 6 survivors, that being Benimaru, Shuna, Shion, Sowe, Hakuro and Kurobe, although if we're counting Hero as well, that total goes up to 7 survivors. Luckily, the Ogre race was able to rebuild thanks to Rimuru Tempest, because when he evolved into a Demon Lord, the Kurenai, 300 hobgoblins that he had assigned to Benimaru were able to receive gifts from the Voice of the World. Due to their admiration for Benimaru and the others, they were able to evolve into Ogres, thus saving the Ogre race from extinction. So this means that hobgoblins were technically the degenerated descendants of the Ogres, and they only need to fulfill the correct conditions to evolve into Ogres. Anyways, having explained the Ogre race, we can now move on to the Kijins, the next evolutionary stage for the race. Now, for an Ogre to evolve into a Kijin, there are 2 methods, being named by someone or through years of dedicated training to break through their racial restrictions, but the second method of evolution rarely happens among Kijins, so more often than not, they just have to wait for someone powerful to name them. And once they become a Kijin, their life expectancy will greatly increase from a few hundred years to over 1,000 years. It sometimes even allowed them to regain their youth, like what happened to Hakuro after receiving his name. Also, it seems like the appearance of a Kijin can be influenced by the ones giving them a name. For example, because Rimuru used to be a human and he subconsciously preferred the look of humans, Benimaru and the other Kijins lost their ogre-like features and took on more human-like features instead. Now, regarding their strength, Kijins are estimated to be around the level of an Orc Lord, but are generally still somewhat weaker than a Demon Lord seed. There are threat levels that range from A to Special A, with Benimaru, Hiro, Shion and Sowe being at the Special A, while Shuna, Hakura and Kurobe were at the level of A after evolving into Kijins. Additionally, after their evolution, they are able to partially regain and reawaken the powers that once belonged to their ancestors, the Ankis, granting the Kijins benefits such as increased magical capacity, a stronger soul, and acquiring new skills or abilities like a unique skill. Moving on, the next evolutionary stage of a Kijin is called an Oni, and reaching this level means they have fully regained the powers of their ancestors and have now become spiritual life forms similar to a Dryad. However, the actual conditions for evolution are unknown, although if a Kijin is recognized by the Voice of the World or with help from a powerful master, they are able to achieve evolution, although it rarely ever happens. That's why Onis were considered to be mythical creatures, often being worshipped as deities by humans or other magic-born creatures and monsters. Although in the anime, Rimuru easily acquired 6 Onis after evolving into a true Demon Lord, bypassing the usual difficulties of the evolution process. This can simply be attributed to Rimuru's unique abilities because he isn't exactly a normal presence and often defies conventional logic. Nevertheless, it's important to note that this is an exception rather than the norm. Anyways, there are actually 2 types of Onis, a fair Oni that derives their power from pure elementals and their nature is more neutrally aligned, and a wicked Oni that derives their power from negative energy and is more demonic in nature. Benimaru and the others had evolved into fair Onis, while Shion is the only one that evolved into a wicked Oni. Both types are equally powerful, and having evolved into one, they possess an immense amount of power comparable to that of a Demon Lord seed, while also having an insanely long lifespan, easily going beyond thousands of years. In threat level terms, they range from a minimum of rank A to a maximum rank of Special S. And similar to the Kijins, they basically have increased magical capacity, they can acquire new skills or abilities, and they are slowly developing towards a more godly presence. Now, having said that, the next evolutionary stage for the Fair Oni and Wicked Oni will still be separate paths. A Fair Oni will evolve into a Divine Oni, or also known as a God Ogre, while a Wicked Oni will evolve into a Divine Fighter or a Fighting God. Both are the final stages in their respective evolutionary paths and mark the ultimate progression for an ogre. However, in order to reach the Divine Oni or Divine Fighter stage, several conditions must be fulfilled. First, one must have a strong enough nucleic card, the core of the soul, that is capable of breaking through all their racial restrictions. They also need to be acknowledged by the Voice of the World, and any lingering regrets can hinder their evolution. Furthermore, they must acquire divinity, meaning they have to complete the process of awakening by taking in a set amount of souls. Once all the required conditions are fulfilled, they can finally undergo the evolution and become a Divine Oni or Divine Fighter, transforming completely into a spiritual being while still retaining a physical body that allows them to interact with the material world. But that wasn't all. They essentially become immortal, meaning as long as their nucleic heart remains intact and they have sufficient magic use, they will never die even if their physical, astral or spiritual body is completely destroyed. The only downside is that they lost the ability to have children as they have become purely spiritual beings. That said, there are actually differences to a Divine Oni and Divine Fighter. For Divine Oni, they will normally be elemental variants depending on the attribute associated with their previous evolution. For example, Benimaru is a Flame Divine Oni while Soe is a Dark Divine Oni, and despite the different elemental variants, they are still part of the same evolutionary path. Now, a Divine Fighter on the other hand doesn't associate with any elemental powers. Instead, their power comes from having an aura-based constitution that allows them to be highly effective against spiritual life forms. That's why we rarely see Xion using any elemental attacks and rather focus more on using aura-based or physical attacks against her opponents. As for how strong they become once they reach this final evolutionary stage, their threat levels are now at least at the Special S, which is equivalent to the Disaster class. Some that reach this stage can also easily become a Super Awakened class, meaning their existence value surpasses 1 million, and because a Divine Oni or Divine Fighter has a strong nuclear card, they can gain access to ultimate level skills, like Benimaru was able to acquire an ultimate skill called Hit King Amaterasu, while Soe was able to acquire an ultimate gift called Moon King Tsukuyomi. And Xion would have acquired an ultimate skill too, but the Mana Seal decided to intervene and stop the operation. Overall, Divine Oni or Divine Fighter has powers that are comparable to a true Demon Lord or an awakened human saint, but it still depends on the individual. Honestly, the evolutionary paths for the Ogres and Kijins in the Tensura world are super fascinating, and they definitely help add a layer of depth and richness to the overall series. Hopefully we'll be able to see more differences and details revealed for the race in the future. And I want to know, which of the evolutionary stages were your favorite, or did I miss anything? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification button if you want more breakdowns like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone.